My grandparents were from the Holocaust survivors, and they lived in a community that had the belief that non-Jews deliberately tried to hurt them. They wanted to have nothing to do with non-Jews, nor with their way of life. Each and every one of us, and this is what I saw when I studied how my brain works, each and every one of us are literally programmed, just like ChatGPT, you could say, are literally programmed by the rules, the methodology, the lifestyle of the group that we're brought up in. You see, when the amygdala is exposed to some sort of emotion, be it excitement or panic or fear or whatever, it's flooded with the brain fluid. When it's flooded, the prefrontal cortex, which is the analytical part of the brain, can't think clearly, can't analyze. No, never. Because you see, now I'm in control of my life. If I would go back, everything, it's like going back to being a robot.
Leah, hi, and welcome to the Whereabouts Still podcast.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for taking the time, Leah. I appreciate a lot. My guest today, Dr. Leah Zitter, spent over 2 decades in a closed extremist religious group before breaking free, earning a PhD in behavioral neuroscience and developing the as-is method, an approach to rewiring the brain for a new way of thinking. I'm so happy that we get to talk, Leah, because your story is amazing, and I think the parallel that we can do between your journey and the expert journey is that when we left the country, we don't just take our luggage and leave. We take also our biases, our prejudices. We take everything with us and we take it in the new environment. And I think that was the case for you at the beginning when you step out. But I would like to start from the beginning. Leah, where were you born? Or where are you originally coming from? I will ask you like this.
London, England.
Nice. And in London, you were born directly in the cult?
It's a closed cult. My grandparents were from the Holocaust survivors, and they lived in a community that had the belief that non-Jews deliberately tried to hurt them. They wanted to have nothing to do with non-Jews, nor with their way of life. And so they separated themselves totally from anything non-Jewish, meaning that I, for instance, was not allowed libraries, radio, no movies, anything like that. I did not know that Margaret Thatcher, for instance, was my prime minister, or I did not know I was even living in a country called Britain. This was way up to my late teens. We didn't speak English either. We were just so totally in our own quote-unquote community.
Oh, it's impressive because it happened in London, like in England. Like you would think it's, but yeah, it's happening everywhere in the world. Was it something like we see now, or I would guess even more extremist? But was it something like we see now in this New York community of Orthodox Jews, or was it even worse than that?
It gets worse and worse with time on the one hand, and there's a sociological explanation for that. When people are in a closed group, everyone wants to be something in their own way. So therefore there's only a comparatively few people in these groups. So people try to outperform the other by being holier than thou. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think there's also a counter accomplishment or in the other way. So there are more and more people that leave. There's also, one can say, a fifth column where there are a lot of people inside the community they call Moranas, who don't believe, but it's so hard for them to leave. So therefore, they live like that, quote unquote, hidden within the community. They called Moranas because in Spain, during the Inquisition, you had Jews who pretended to be Christian, Catholics, to save their lives. So they kept the Jewish faith secretly, were Catholic on the outside.
How do you start questioning the rules that are around you? What triggered that for you?
For me, it was very, very early on. I always tended to ask questions. I wanted to know. I taught myself, for instance, like, let's say if I would see some of my first books, not Jewish books, were just books I saw, say, from the garbage cans from the street, doctor's office, anything like that. And I was always asking questions. So my parents said I had a bad spirit. I literally had a bad spirit, and then they tried many different things to take that bad spirit from me. My principal of the school would tell me that God gave me a man's brain as a challenge to suppress it. That was my challenge in life, to suppress my brain. Now, going back to your question, so one of the things that my parents did for the sake of my soul was put me in my grandmother's attic. I was there for about a year. Every so often I would be called down, and my uncles, they had come from Antwerp at the time, they would berate me or quote unquote educate me on how I should be a good girl, fit in, and so forth. During that time in the attic, I had not much else to do. I would fantasize a lot, but one of the things I did was look out the window. And there I'd see there were people from different schools. There was a group from a Catholic school. Now I know it's a Catholic school. And they were dressed one way. They had their tennis rackets. They had different sort of uniform, usually with blazers. And then there were those Muslim. They had their skirts, pants over skirts. And then there was from the group I grew up in, say usually wigs with their children in strollers, men with black hats, beards, girls with skirts to knees, thick tights and so. And I would start thinking, now imagine if these are all, how do you say it, cardboard dolls. Where you tear out the paper and you fold clothes around it. And I would imagine taking the clothes from this group, putting them onto the other, putting a fishing pole, say, in the hands of the man of my group, and a gun in the hands of the woman of my group. And so just switching over. And then I thought, like, each person from these groups, they're brought up from youngest on to spend their money a certain way, marry this kind of person, live where they have to live, do these kind of jobs, worship this being or not this being, and then that's how their lives are going to be, according to their group, and then they're going to die. And maybe all the time they've wasted who they can be. And then I began to think, and I thought, well, maybe that's what's happening to me also. So how can I know that what I've been taught is true or false? And then along the way, it became, instead of how can I know what is true or false, I thought, how can I know what is good for me and what is not good for me? Because true and false was harder to evaluate. And that was one of the things. I think that was the main turning point, the main thing that triggered it.
The basic rule to define the difference between good and bad. Because I do guess you were always told what is good and bad for you. Like you didn't have the power to decide.
Oh, we were, each and every one of us, and this is what I saw when I studied how my brain works, each and every one of us are literally programmed, just like ChatGPT, you could say, are literally programmed by the rules, the methodology, the lifestyle of the group that we're brought up in. So not only was my brain programmed into what is good and bad for me, but also what is true and false, what my goals should be, where I come from, meaning in the society that I grew up in, it was programmed, well, a God created you. This is where you came from, and in the end, you are either going to go to hell or you're going to go to paradise, but you're going to be accountable to God. In another society, people come, the theory is that people come from another source and there's a different end of life to them. So in other words, my whole raison d'etre, my whole thing of life, my whole perspective was programmed into me. And that was how I perceived the world around me, outside my head. And that was how I ended up believing, and that was how I ended up acting. And so in the end, one could say I could have become, or I was at risk of being, a clone of my group. Just like ChatGPT manifests what its programmer is.
Must have been terrifying, though, to think about leaving the controlled environment that you were in.
It was a gradual process. And I could almost compare it to birth, to giving birth, meaning it was something, first of all, I was pushed out. I was told I was not normal. I remember, like good long time every day praying to God to make me normal. I was told I was insane. I was told I had a bad spirit. I was called lunatic instead of my name, by my mother that was. So I was already pushed out. That was part of it. I tried to fit in. There was a period when I tried to fit in. But along the way, and it's certainly when I left it after I married, saw other countries, deliberately tried to see as much of the world as possible. So got myself into a lot of uncomfortable situations. I began to see that a lot of what I saw contradicted what I was taught. And so it was a process.
It's inspiring how you tell the story, at least for me, because it takes a lot of power of will, and it takes a lot of strength to go through what you went through and to be able to speak so freely about it. The process, like you said, it was a process for sure, but you still experienced a shock when you moved out, right?
A series of shocks, certainly. A series of shocks, and there were times I didn't know whether, there were times I wanted to kill myself. There were times I didn't know if I felt like I was pressed against the wall. And there were times when I kept on telling myself, you're pressed against the wall, like now you're going to press through the wall and get to the other side. Or I would tell myself things like, use the past to transform the future, or rather than say there's no way out, like say, how am I going to do it? This is what I want to do. How am I going to do it? Because the whole time running at the back of my mind was, there's only one life, and I want to make something of this life. But now I can sound brave. There were lots of times in my life where I thought I had come to the end of it. No turning back. Because, sometimes this would go wrong. There were times I didn't, like after I got divorced. So I had left the only community there was. The Scottish police were involved because my family, my parents had tried to kidnap the children. I wasn't earning anything. My ex-husband wouldn't give me any support. The community, of course, wouldn't give me any support. I was totally shunned by them. I knew nothing about the outside world. I didn't know how to use a bank then. I had no connections in the outside world. I didn't have a car. I didn't know how to drive a car then. Nothing, virtually nothing. And the police told me, well, for my own safety, I would have to go to a totally different place in the country, change my identity, start anew.
In all of this time, did you ever had a moment of doubt when you thought, I better go back?
No, never. Never. Because you see, now I'm in control of my life. If I would go back, everything, it's like going back to being a robot.
For sure, but still, I'm talking about the initial moments when you're out, when it was extremely hard, when you had to deal with everything, like you just said, like a newborn adult, because you're not a kid anymore, so you didn't have the time to learn everything. You had to take everything out of the sudden at once, and I'm talking about those moments. Of course, now you are in control, but in those moments, did you ever had the moment of doubt, the moment when you thought, I might go back?
Never doubt. I was always being pushed forward. I think there just wasn't the moment for doubt. It was like I met once a social worker. She came from a totally different situation. She told me how her rich husband had divorced her. She had been physically abused by him. She had to take control. She had to care for a child. There was no time to doubt or to wonder or to have self-pity on her. She had to find a job and she had to move on. And I was in a similar situation. I also had to take care of my children. I also had to make money. I also had to just move on. I wanted to live my life. I wanted to make something of it. There was no time. There was no room for doubt or anything.
The pressure was so big to find your way in your life that you didn't have the time to think about going back.
You were just pushed forward. You were pushed forward, and also I'm not the type of person to ever give in to depression. I think I'm more a fighter.
That's really important. That's obvious. Yeah, that's obvious. How did the outside world react? So you said you were talking to this social worker. How you had contact with multiple persons at the beginning, I think, where you told your story. How was the reaction
to my telling my story?
Yeah. Did you feel them judgmental?
Depends who. I still knew that lots of people wouldn't want to hear my story. I also found that certain people just wanted to hear my story, and then it was sort of goodbye, Charlie. Like, now we know you, and you've been interesting. Goodbye. I also found out that certain people like to hear certain aspects and not others. But I remember I also learned to hide my identity. So, for instance, I remember one time there were these tourists wandering the streets, and they were lost. And I was going with them, showing them their location. They asked me where I am from. I said, from London. They said, oh, wow, we also are from London. Then they started digging. Which part? Eventually, I told them Stamford Hill, and I find out they're no longer walking with me. They're way behind because there's no answer. Like, really? So...
That's okay. So there were a kind of prejudice there regarding the group, but it's interesting.
It's more a fear when people hear it. After all, my great uncles, I would often hear them, and they would boast how they would stalk certain women who they thought immodest and beat them up. This was a violent group. This is a radical terrorist group I grew up in.
But it's interesting, and I'm completely not educated in the psychology of the groups, but it's interesting that they let you go so easy.
First of all, I wasn't a male. They did try to kidnap my sons. I was a woman, and a woman is
disposable.
Is not as valued as much. And it wasn't letting go so easy. They just saw me in terms of marriage material. And so early on, because I wasn't conforming. So what they would tell me is, look, people are the neighbors. They would always say the neighbors are gossiping about you, and it's going to harm the marriage chances of your siblings. In other words, no one saw us as an individual. The males were valued more than the women, and the women were only seen in terms of objects, in terms of to assist the males, to help the males, and to reproduce. So they did try to keep me in the fold, one can say, in the beginning, like, quote unquote, educating me to be normal, to be one of them, not to ask questions. My grandmother would beg me, just sew, just pretend to sew, just rock children, just show that you like children, just go to all the events. Stop asking all these questions. Stop asking questions, they would say.
Sounds a lot like Handmaid's Tale, the
Yes.
series. It sounds a lot, I have to say. It's
yes.
Okay, that means, let's say, they let you go because they had the feeling that you are breaking the spirit of the group. You are making them feel ashamed about what you were doing and the fact that you are asking questions and so on. So they saw it as a relief somehow.
Well, they basically didn't let me go, meaning I was put into a forced and deceived marriage. And then along the years, I slipped out of that marriage. And then there was an attempt, as I said, to kidnap my sons. And then I went to, I just slipped off to the remotes of Virginia. I chose this place in Virginia only because I had read Henry James or something. And I thought, oh, Virginia is a very cultured place. It's great. What I didn't know was that I ended up in a remote place. It was a Trump messianic cult there. And there was a lot of it was also the refuge of serial killers, according to what I read and according to what the police tell me. Very extremely religious place in terms of there were Baptists there, Mormons, Jehovah's Witness. One of my neighbors was a Jehovah's Witness. So every single Christian religion was highly represented there. White supremacists there. My neighbor was KKK, and he called me sister. He didn't know I was Jewish. So that's where we lived. There were dirt roads. There were wells. Still, it was in like a remote part.
My God.
But that's where I got my business, made my business, got my PhD, enough money to leave after 6 years.
So you studied while being married in the group
online. Still? No, not when I was married. Afterwards, online in that place.
Okay. Impressive. That's
when I was
your story.
Married, I did do some stints, but I'm talking about my actual PhD. Was
okay. Okay. Leah, if it would be an advice that you can give to yourself back then, would it be to leave earlier from the group?
Don't think I was prepared then. I think all these things had to happen to me step by step to prepare me.
So everything was part of the process, you'd say. And then you went out. You've done your PhD. How did you decide on neuroscience? Was it the experience in the group?
Yeah, but it was a process too. It started off with, how can I know what is true or false in order to live my own life? Then how can I know what is good for me, what is bad for me? Again, in order to live my own life. I studied I read whatever I could. I studied whatever I could. I explored whatever I could to get an answer to this. So, for instance, I read up comparative mathematics. I looked into meditation, Krishnamurti, for instance. General semantics interested me, comparative religions, psychoanthropology, sociology, on and on, virtually anything that could give me an answer. Then I explored into how, then I thought, okay, it's my brain that leads me. It's like a clockwork, the motor in a clockwork machine. I'm going to read up about the brain. I bought Plastic Brain, and I read up on cognitive reasoning, how a person reasons, how a person comes to their decision making inside the brain, how that works. I experimented for a while. All the time I was in this marriage, I was really bored. So I bought some rats and experimented on them, not in a cruel way, I must say. I asked in the San Jose jail, actually this was Santa Clara and San Francisco. I offered to counsel parolees, so I tested my ideas on them. I lived for a while in Hungary and tested my ideas on some neo-Nazis that were there. They were actually Jews who thought they were neo-Nazis. They didn't know they were Jews. This was because of I know it's crazy. This was because of the Holocaust. A lot of people were afraid, and they hated Judaism. Their children wanted to blend in.
This is extremely funny. I'm sorry.
It's okay. The children wanted to blend in, so they joined the Arab crust. And then they discovered that they were Jewish, which didn't always come which often turned out to be a shock for them.
Huh?
So
I can imagine how that went. So they met up. They said, "Okay, we are going to some Jew's house. Yeah, let's go." But that's my house. Oh.
It was sometimes actually in one case, someone by play was called a dirty Jew and comes home crying. That's how she told me this story. It was a he actually, but it was a she who told me this story from what happened to her father. He comes home crying to his parents to tell him, well, you really are a Jew. There's a lot of such. There was this story, and it was made into a documentary of one of the heads of the Arrow Cross Party over there. And he discovered he was Jewish. And then he had it. Yeah. I think today he actually lives in Germany, but there was a documentary made of this case.
How wrong is this world that you decide as a person to be neo-Nazi and then to discover that you are Jewish, and you just think everything it's ideology. Everything that we have around us, it's ideology. It's so sad.
Precisely. An ex-Hezbollah agent, former Hezbollah agent, she referred me to a movie where nowadays someone growing up, what was it? I think she told me in Lebanon, Hezbollah, something like that, and he was a leader in one of these, and he discovered he was Jewish. So it happens all the time.
I mean, it makes sense, but yeah, everything is ideology. And you went and you tested your method all around. You said, okay, I will do neuroscience. Then you discovered the as-is method. Or how was the process to get this method?
It didn't just come like that. It was a lot of things. My question was also, how can I know what is right or wrong? How can I overcome my trauma? And again, none of these movements to help people de-radicalize seem to work. It basically came from, again, how can I know what is right or wrong, and what is good or bad? So then I saw along the way that all of these things merge together. For instance, like I have this idea in my head from everything that I was told. That's how I view the world. So for instance, growing up, if I would have viewed you now, I see you with this red sweater, say, and I would have thought, hey, a man shouldn't wear a red sweater. You are other. You are contaminating for me. I should not speak to you at all. So there's this model, this picture in my head. This picture in my head leads me to act a certain way. I may not be having this podcast with you at all. Actually, I shouldn't be speaking to you at all now because you're a man and I have to be more modest. And so therefore, my life would turn out differently and I may waste my life. So that was one aspect that this came from. How can I know that this picture in my head reflects the real world, is right for me? I have to find out what the real world is. To give you an analogy, it's like you play lotto, picture lotto, right? So you've got the way to win the game is that the picture on the card has to utterly match the picture on the larger card outside. If I want to win or profit or have a successful life, the picture in my head of things outside the world, outside my head, have to totally match. For instance, if I think that you are a bad person and doing this show is bad for me, then I won't go to the show, then I won't interact with you, and then I have lost a lot of things. So therefore, I have to make sure the picture in my head merges with the picture outside. Now, to find a way that it actually merges came from a lot of things. It came from images of how the brain works. It came from my learning of how the brain functions when I am emotional, when I am indoctrinated, when I think. I also found out that people like me who are born in the setting that we are born in, our parts of our brain, like our amygdala, our anterior cingulate region, and other parts like that are supposed to help us think rationally and supposed to help us curb our emotions, actually don't, and they're structured differently than someone like you who grew up in an open setting. So, and then also, there was another time that also brought me closer to this as is. For instance, I realized that anytime I would see someone with a beard, say with a black hat, or that resembled someone from my group, I would be triggered. Say if I was biking, I would stand up on the paddles and whistle or something like that. In other words, the trigger elicited an irrational response. Again, there was this picture in my head. I would see this person and the picture in my head prompted me, automated me to react in a certain way. But outside, but the man may have been innocuous. He may have been really harmless. So one of the things that then helped me was this brain research. It was actually semantic research. So for instance, in a university, in a school in Belgium, the researcher did this research on the class. He showed them certain emotional pictures, like, say, someone kissing someone else, someone hurting someone else. What does this remind you of? And they would say, certain words like emotional. Then he would say, okay, he flashed the word love on the board. How do you feel? Hate on the board. How do you feel? All the time imaging the amygdala. Then he broke up the words love, Love. How do you feel? And people the students were able to think more rationally. the amygdala was no longer involved. They were able to think more rationally, able to make more rational judgments. So that, going back to the man who triggered me, I would take the person and look at, okay, his nose is a triangle. His eyes are vertical, say. His beard is like this. So more and more, when I broke the person, the image, the trigger into shapes, I was then able to act more rationally. So that is also what I call as is, taking this model, this picture model in my head, and taking the outside phenomena and reducing the outside phenomena to facts. I'll give you an example of a call I had yesterday. This guy, he used to be an evangelical, and he was triggered by his idea of God. Like he saw God as a certain kind of being who may hurt him, punish him because he had no longer followed this God. So I showed him 3 pictures. I showed him an elephant, the Hindu thing of God. I showed him a deity. This was a rock one with horns. And I showed him a picture of an old man, the flowing white beard face. And I asked him, which is your idea of God? Which is, when you look at these pictures, which is God? Instantly, he pointed to the old man. And I asked him then when he looks at the man, what does he think? And he says, oh, this man is authoritarian. This man is omniscient. This man can do everything. He's supposed to be all kind, all of that. Instantly, that's how he described the man. So I told him, if you were a Hindu, you'd look at the elephant and you say, this is God. And you'd describe it with different qualifications. If you were a Canaanite, you'd see the Baal, the one with the storm, and say, in charge of storm, and now it's good for me. I said, look at this man clearly as the man is. When you see he's authoritarian, omniscient, so what do you see? Really, the man is white-skinned, a long flowing white beard, a robe around him. His hand happened to be lifted. But it took a while for this person this chunk to get out of any time he'd look at it, to draw the line between that this man will hurt me. This man, knows everything about me. Because that was the image that this group had ingrained in him, linked with that association, and that was how he automatically reacted. Still to the present day, his whole life was manipulated by that image.
So basically, we associate previous experiences with the pictures that happened or that were connected to that. So somehow, the brain is holding on to this conditioning, even though in theory it doesn't serve us anymore, right?
Right. Meaning from the earliest on, from the moment we were born, when our brains were so plastic, these symbols were implanted in us by our group, implanted in us and linked with certain associations about how we have to live to be a good human, which people we have to associate with to be a good human, and so forth. And they've been implanted in us so deep and so often that often we don't even recognize or know what we've been implanted with, and we automatically react and live our lives accordingly.
That means we keep these
Like
rules.
algorithms.
We keep this rule in our head until
Yes.
this rule is replaced by a new rule, which is
Usually
overruling the
it's
old
not.
one.
Unless something may happen to us sometimes, or unless we really want to. But the thing is, usually we keep these rules in our heads because we don't even question them. And they're called deep culture, by the way. We're not aware of them. It's like brushing our teeth. It's something we do automatically. We're sure this is good, that this is normal. Why should we question it?
I do guess that in this process, a big role is playing the neuroplasticity of the brain. because this is something which I hear a lot in a lot of podcasts and that I'm listening as well, that it's a new discovery, at least is what I know. Again, not educated in psychology, I'm just listening and trying to understand. But how long does it take for the brain to rewire itself? It has somehow a connection with how big was the impact of the picture that we had before?
Brain can only rewire itself if you want to rewire it. Usually the more intense the implanting of these symbols or these neurons in cells, and the more they're practiced, which they're practiced they're ingrained in these environments through rituals and through the pain, through the punishment and the reward. So over, and through the intenseness of punishment and reward, they are embedded deep, and until it really becomes part of us, just like a robot is programmed. The conclusion or the ideas that I finally came to about how I can rewire or reclaim my brain is something really relatively new about neurogenesis, that neurons, what neuroscientists have comparatively recently discovered is that new brain cells can be born even into an adult. And I was wondering, how can these brain cells be born? If these new brain cells are born, and if I can choose to birth them, then maybe those can replace the old ones. And basically what I discovered is that, first of all, you have to move to a totally new environment, because as long as you stay in the old environment, you're going to be exposed to the same triggers, and those same cells are going to be entrenched and reiterated in your brain. So you need to go to a different environment. You also need to see things as they really are, not as you think that they are. So, for instance, really concentrate on speaking to you. I'm seeing you as you are. A man who happens to wear a red sweater with glasses, and so the fact that you happen to have a red sweater, why is wearing a red sweater bad? Why does that make you bad? So seeing you as you are in your forms, not according to the old model in my head. Keeping on seeing you, so seeing you, the actual act of seeing you as you are, entrenches or births, one can say, a new cell in my brain. Constantly, over and over and over again, seeing you as you are, entrenches yourself, makes connections, and entrenches those connections, deepens them. That causes upward neuroplasticity, meaning that as I'm seeing this over, these new railway tracks or brain tracks, one can say, are getting deeper. And as that is happening, there's also the downward neuroplasticity at the same time. So meaning my brain is beginning to think, help me perceive in a different way, as my old form of perceiving that has been put into me by where I grew up gradually fades.
Mm-hmm. So that means the only exercise that you have, or the only practice that you have, at least from my understanding, is to try to see things as they are, as it is, like to see the thing that it is, and to try to tell yourself that in fact none of those shapes are harming you, none of those shapes are doing anything that your prejudice was saying.
Yeah, now that can help me when I problem solve, when I make rational decisions, and so it's much harder to combat the emotional thing. If I see a trigger, say, if I would go back to where I grew up or something like that, I couldn't do it because instantly I would be swamped. But to help me make the right decisions in my life, that helps me then, because it's cognitive. You see, always the emotional thinking instinctively preamps the rational. That's the way the brain works. If I'm hit by something emotional, a fear, a trauma, or something like that, instantly I react. And so this is much harder than for me to do the as-is approach. After that, I can step back and I can look at the stimulus more as it is, and then I can tell myself, hey, I've been wrong. But it's easier for me to do if I want to problem solve or I want to make sure I'm doing the right things, I'm making the right choices in my life about how to spend the money, how to spend my money, which job to have, whether to do this podcast, say anything and everything like that, what to believe, and so forth.
So the emotional is kicking in. I would try to simplify it by saying as a defense mechanism to say, okay, this is, I don't know, you see Paul and Paul is aggressive. So usually I know that the guys with beard and with red sweater are aggressive. I pull back because I know that's what the emotional side is saying. It's something like the defense mechanism, like the wild us, let's say it like this.
But now I've come to the point, though, I found that I can actually see these people. Don't think I could go back to where I grew up. Not that far, but I do find I can see the same people that I grew up with, exactly the same, and I no longer feel that panic at all. I can be in places that would have given me panic at one time. And because now I am so used to, it took a lot of practice and constant practice, but I'm so used to seeing people in terms of the shape of their face, their bodies, or whatever. I no longer have those panic attacks.
Was it only because of you seeing people and building with small examples? Like I see someone who looks like that I'm not afraid. I have to tell myself I'm not afraid of him and so on, and everything is fine, and his nose and so on. Or do you think that somehow the brain managed to understand I'm not in danger anymore?
No, not from how I found that the brain works. You see, if what happens when the amygdala is exposed to some sort of emotion, be it excitement or panic or fear or whatever, it's flooded with the brain fluid.
Mm-hmm.
When it's flooded, the prefrontal cortex, which is the analytical part of the brain, can't think clearly, can't analyze because the emotion. So what has to be is the water in the amygdala has to go to the prefrontal cortex, has to drain out. Then the prefrontal cortex can clearly evaluate. That's what I came to from other parts of research. So in other words, I have to kick this prefrontal cortex, the logical thing, into drive. How do I do it? That's where the research done by the semantics help me. When you take, say, the love or the hate, the emotional element, the emotional stimulus, and you reduce that emotional stimulus into logic components. So I took that piece of semantics research and I applied it to humans and to triggers that got my amygdala into overdrive. I'd see this man, I'd see this, take this place, and I've tried it to lots of different things. And I'd reduce it, break it down, fragment it into logical things, be it its shape, usually it's shape, and something like that. And now my prefrontal cortex is in control, and naturally I am no longer panicking, afraid, emotional, teary, all of that.
What's one small change that can make someone who's in your situation that can help him in this case? One small one.
I would just tell them to leave their environment, because the longer they are in that environment, there's no chance for them. It's virtually impossible for them to change because the same stimulus is repeated over and over and over again. And so their brain is repeating that pattern.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so living the environment is the most important part.
The most important, absolutely. They need to be in a fresh place. Then they have a chance to reclaim, one can say, to deprogram, to reprogram.
During this rewiring of the brain, in one way or the other, we are erasing the old us, or we are telling the brain it's not the same person. Is that a danger?
Some things, some things are good. Some things that were ingrained in you could be good for you. Some things could not be good for you. But like this, when you see things, when you train yourself to see things as they really are, you begin to discover the things that were ingrained in you that are not correct. So you get more and more. So many things that may be myths that were ingrained in you, you see that those are myths.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that were true or helpful for you, they remain.
Why I'm asking you this, because most of the cases when someone is moving from one country to, of course, your case, it's a clear case of good and bad, but you have a lot of cases in which you are moving from one country to another, and then you're kind of leaving your old self behind, and you have to rewire the social rules of the society, take the new habits that you have in the new society. And I think the method is also good for this case, in which you are switching to a different society where the society has different rules that you have to adapt to. And the rules that you knew from your old society are not the same. I'm giving you my example. It's also a bit funny. When I say I moved to Germany from Romania, and Romania where the speed limit are, while driving, they are kind of optional. And I moved here, and in the first 2 months, I paid about 300 euros in speeding tickets. And that was a hardcore rewiring of my brain, because I knew if I keep doing it, I will be bankrupt. But I think this is also the method can be also applied by people switching cultures. How did you when you moved to Israel, because you moved to Israel before the war started? Have you used this method in adapting to the new surroundings?
Yeah, I use it all the time. Say I meet a lot of people that are from Russia, that are from Ukraine, from Yemen. I know Druze, I know Bedouins, I know Arabs. So I'm very interested in meeting all kinds of people. But how I use this is in a totally different way. I understand that where they grew up, and this is, by the way, both cultural neuroscience and social neuroscience, where they grew up has wired their brains in a certain way. So they perceive the world, they see things in a very different way than I may do. And therefore, they and I could maybe misunderstand each other. So oftentimes, first of all, understanding that they perceive the world that way helps me befriend all these different kinds of people. Because I understand I don't get hurt that easily, or so I just understand that the way that they see things is because of how they grew up. And I'm just fascinated by that. Then oftentimes I may say, well, I think of this way. How do you think of it? Do you perceive this concept or this aspect in the same way as I do? And very often I find that they may have a totally different mental model, i.e. a different way of seeing the world because of the symbols that were implanted in their brains by their environments. For instance, each country, there was a person from Germany, actually, no, he was from Amsterdam, Hofstede, who designed this national dimensions or so. He says that every country has its own characteristics. He said about 16. There was someone else who built on that and said maybe 20 or so. But so, for instance, there are some countries that are progressive. Another country could be more individualistic. There are some countries that are theological. Another country could be nihilistic. Some countries are very individualistic, did I say, materialistic, progressive. There's all these different characteristics that some countries, for instance, they are in the moment, other countries more laid back, some more masculine, others more feminine, and these they implant in the people that grew up in that country. So therefore you can say, this person is westernized, that person is Americanized. They have the American dream. When you say a Yankee or you say, oh, that's a Brit or a German person, a person ultimately knows what you mean. Now, the American person may find someone from Asia, say, weird, they call them, but weird because it's weird to them, weird to their culture. Now, when I realize that this person who happens to be Russian, happens to be Ukraine, it's just because they were born in a totally different setting and implanted with the characteristics of their culture. It doesn't make them weird, quote unquote. It's just that they have a different perspective to I that was maybe Americanized or so. So I just don't feel threatened by them. I can just talk to them. The same thing, talk to the Ethiopians, say, and inquire, like, why, how do you see this? How do you see that? Because each of us are ingrained also by our folklore, the media that we were brought up on, the celebrities that the country thinks are, oh, these are celebrated people. Each country has its own celebrated people.
I've seen
off a bit, or I was talking too much. Sorry.
Oh no, absolutely fine. I'm extremely interested. I'm fascinated about the background of it. But what I realized during this podcast until now is that everyone who already had an experience abroad tends to be more understanding about the cultures, because he was also in the situation when people didn't understood his habits, didn't understood his behavior, and that's what makes you open-minded. Let's say, do you think the secret is to travel? And when I say to travel, I mean to make this experience abroad, so that it makes you a bit more open-minded towards embracing different people with different habits.
To live a life, to do the activities of the other, to wear their clothes, their style of clothes, say, to eat their food, not just to travel. People can travel and be among their group and look at the outsider as an outsider. It's to be an insider among these people.
I always like to say that when you go into a holiday, you get a demo version of the country, because you don't get to experience anything from the locals. You only are there, you are enjoying the food. Maybe you are searching for, if you are from Germany, you are searching for a German restaurant every once in a while, and that's why you only leave the demo version. I think that these student exchange programs, and I cannot recommend it enough. I never had the opportunity to have one. I only had, I think, 1 month. I was somewhere south of England in my 11th grade. But this is something which is opening your mind extremely to understand that there are people who just are. They have different habits than you. They have different things that they grow up as you. It's not that they are mean. It's not that they want. They mean some. They wanted to be, I don't know, in a different way. They're just, that's their normal. And as long as you can accept that that's their normal, brings us forward.
Yeah, that's the way they literally perceive the world, because that's how they've been embraced, conditioned, programmed.
It's extremely interesting because it's exactly the pattern that I've seen around me. Mostly people who never been outside, and it doesn't matter if it's Romania, if it's Germany, people who are living only in their own country, in their native country, are usually the guys who are more into nationalism,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
into this extreme, like nothing is better than our thing,
Right.
no culture is better than our culture, and nobody has better potatoes than us. I'm just
Right.
exaggerating, but you know what I mean. And usually the people that are traveling abroad, they realize, oh, the world is not as small as I thought, and the I have my options open. I want to keep my intercultural experiences open. I
Uh-huh.
had the honor to have a big team when I first came to Germany, and I think there were 27, 28 nationalities, and it was extremely fascinating to discuss about the cultural differences, to go with the Indian colleagues to the Indian restaurant, to tell
Uh-huh.
us, okay, what to order from the Indian restaurant, to go with the colleagues from Kazakhstan to a Russian restaurant, tell us what to order from there, and that was extremely interesting for me, at least. I kind of lost my ideas because I went also to this culture difference topic, and this is because this is fascinating for me, and I love the fact that um, first of all, I think that we need to be good to each other. We need to have the understanding for each other, because this hate that is happening in our culture is not something which is natural. I don't think that this is something that we have to support. And I think the example that you just gave in, that there were Jewish neo-Nazis because they didn't even know they were Jewish. That's the best example of hate for no reason. But except going abroad, Leah, what can someone do to train themselves to be more open-minded and in accepting cultural differences?
I think just exactly as I said it now, to realize how our brains are programmed. So my brain may think and perceive the world this way. Someone else's brain may perceive the world the other way, a different way, just because of where and how they grew up. And each one thinks that they're in the right, that how they see it is the right way, and that the other one is wrong.
In your experience, do people hold on to their beliefs in crisis situation more than they hold on to their belief in peaceful
I think it
situations?
depends which kind of person. Some people, sometimes it takes a shock to jolt someone out of their belief. And sometimes the person may all the more tightly cling on to their belief. Really depends on the person. It's like, again, this former Hezbollah agent, she told me she was one of two people who left the village, left Hezbollah. And she said because what they were doing made her the crisis actually made her question, how do I know I'm the right person? I'm in the right. So she wanted to look around and think and see, whereas she said most of the other people, they just hunkered down all the more and they became more extreme. They were afraid. They wanted to keep their community, their way of life. They wanted to conform. They wanted to, so they became even more extreme. So I think it depends on the person.
How does this storytelling that you are saying, because this what the girl from Hezbollah told you, it's kind of a storytelling. How does storytelling impact the way we view other people? Do you think it helps, or do you think we tend not to buy the story?
I try to put storytelling into virtually anything because what I'm trying to explain is so conceptual, so abstract, it can come across as boring. Also, the
Mm-hmm.
way I've taught myself I've tried to visualize it as much as possible. So, and people tend to think naturally, our brains tend to think in terms of pictures. We visualize.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. Because I think that storytelling, it's also a big part of, like you said, everything that you don't put it in a nice story, it's kind of boring because it doesn't capture the attention of whomever is watching it. Um, if someone would be to embrace a new culture, or no, if someone would be afraid to embrace the new culture in which they are in because they are afraid to lose their old self, what's a mindset shift that can help them?
They may not lose their old self. they are just developing, maximizing their potential, maximizing their lives. As they see things out of their brain for what they really are, automatically the brain begins to register, hey, this is what I was told is actually not correct. I can maximize myself better if I see things as they really are. For instance, well, there's something that's called identity economics that claims that the way that we spend our money is, again, how we were programmed. So, for instance, where I grew up, let's say they would spend a lot on wine, on meat, on certain types of food. And so even if the person didn't like it, but many people may end up misspending their money. Someone else maybe may spend on gaming or may spend on certain literature. And so just because their country does that, but they themselves may actually not like to spend that money that way. So the more we realize what comes from our culture and what is really good for us and what actually may harm us, the more we do what is really good for us and the more we grow. You know, there's this movie in the 1980s, and so I think it was called, I can't remember the name now, but How We Live or something like that. But it was of this tramp. He was wandering the streets of LA and he picks up sunglasses, magic glass. He picks up glasses from a garbage can. And he's walking past billboards. And on one billboard says a woman reclining with a bikini or so. And he happens to put on the sunglasses. And the glasses, instead of him seeing the woman, it's like, buy this. He sees magazines of cars or whatever outside the store. He puts on the glasses, and instead of seeing the picture on the magazine basically says, buy this. On and on. He sees a man, and the man comes out of a store. The man looks handsome, a businessman with his suit. Puts on the glasses, and the man transmutes into a monster. The dollar bill in the man's hand just says, buy, or money is king, or whatever. So without the glasses, the man is being persuaded by others into certain actions to spend his money for these things. With the glasses are truth revealing. The man gets through all the deceptive illusions out there and sees them for what they really are. And this is something like maybe what my as-is method is, that we've got all these illusions in our head to spend our money this way, to spend our time this way, to respect these people and not respect those others. But when we see things as they really are, we can get past those deceptions and hopefully do things that really help us instead of waste our abilities, our time, our money, our life.
I think I know the movie.
Yeah.
I have to say, I think I've seen the movie. I don't remember the name, unfortunately, but I think I've seen the movie as well, because I remember that buy image when he put the glasses on. I do have it somehow as a mental image in my brain somewhere. I think, or you just described it really nice that it built up in my brain. Yeah, it was an amazing conversation. I enjoyed. I don't know when this hour went by. I have to be honest. I'm fascinated by the way, first of all, by your story, and second by your method, because I think that it's exactly what most of the people need to be able to have a new start. And I think what you said at the end, Leah, like, we don't lose ourselves, we just improve ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important, that's the biggest takeaway that everyone should take from this, because there is no way in which you lose ourselves. You just find a way to make yourself better than you are. And that should be our goal. Leah, before we wrap things up, I'm always preparing a set of 5 rapid fire questions for all my guests.
Mm-hmm.
And if you allow me, I would dare to ask yours. What's one belief you had to unlearn to grow?
You say rapid. I think that God would punish me for so many things that I'm doing right now. You know, thinking back to my past, if I knew the me that I am now, I think I wouldn't want to live. I would have wanted to die.
I have to say that's one thing that was really hard for me as well. I'm not coming from the same background, but also this God is punishing me for everything. This is something that it's got stuck there. I have this question prepared before the interview. That's why it makes no sense now, but I still ask you because I said 5. What's the first thing that someone should do when they feel stuck? You just said leave the environment, and I think that's something that can stay there. What's a book or research that changed your perspective on life?
Don't think it changed my perspective, but I did love Nietzsche, the Superman, the Uberman.
Übermensch.
Mm-hmm.
If you could describe cultural adaptation in one word, what would it be?
Just recognizing that the other person's brain has been programmed to perceive the world a certain way, rather different than yours. You know, it's like, sorry for going a bit off, but it's like your stomach, right, gets used to the food that you eat. You eat certain you eat certain food. Your stomach gets used to that. If you feed it different kinds of food, it would vomit. That's the same thing with the brain. When the person's brain has been reared on cultural food for 20, 30 years or whatever of its life, and it's fed different kinds of stuff, usually the brain spits that out. It's called malconformation, when the brain likes to accept things that it's used to, that fits with it. Anything else, it vomits. Very similar to the way the stomach does. And again, each culture has the food that its stomach is used to, that its stomach likes and accepts. Same thing ditto with the brain.
I would try to sum it up by saying accepting the different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end, that's it. Learn to accept the fact that they have a different good than your good. What's the biggest myth about breaking free from old conditioning?
Well, on the one hand, there are those people that say, look, everything is fatalistic and you're programmed this way. You can't. On the other hand, there's the other myth that, you can do anything you ever want to be, including being a basketball star or whatever. I think the truth lies in the middle.
Nice. I like this. I liked it. I like the sentence. Leah, please tell people where they can find more information about your work and about the ASIS method.
Just type it in or ask ChatGPT. You can provide it to them.
I will.
Hermione and all the rest of them and I are good friends by now.
Perfect. Me too. I will link your website in the show note caption for everyone who wants to find a shorter way to your work, because it's fascinating. It was, at least for me. I want to thank you a lot for giving me the opportunity to know you, Leah, and to know your story and your method. And I have to say it was an impressive conversation for me. Time flew by. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for having me on.
And I'm just an email away, Leah. And whenever you feel the need of sharing something with the world, I'm here. Just drop me an email and we can do this again sometimes.
Whenever you want. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for teaching me a lot too.
Thank you so much.
You're a happy guy.
I'm trying. I'm trying. Have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye bye, guys. Bye.